Some people hold on to land because they love it. Others hold on because it's the last living proof that someone who mattered once walked it. Have you ever watched a family farm hold together through drought and debt, only to fall apart the moment the person at the center of it was gone? Miriam Cutter laid her father out in a blue work shirt and a BOLO tie. She chose that shirt because it still had a grass stain on the left elbow from the last time she'd seen him in the south pasture, checking fence. She wanted something in the casket that still smelled like the farm. 3 weeks after Raymond Cutter was buried at Mount Olivet Cemetery in Christian County, Missouri, her brother Gerald sent a letter. Not a phone call. A letter through an attorney. It said he intended to exercise his legal right as co-heir to force the sale of the farm. What neither of them knew yet was that Raymond had left something inside his Bible, tucked between pages in the book of Psalms, in a handwriting that looked exactly like a man who knew he was running out of time, but not how soon. The Cutter farm sits in the Ozark Hills about 11 miles southeast of the town of Ozark, Missouri, along a county road that turns to loose gravel just past the old grain co-op sign that has been sun-bleached to near white for 30 years. The land has been the family since 1938, when Coleman Cutter, Raymond's father, bought 220 acres from a neighbor who couldn't hold out through the drought years. He paid $3,400 cash and signed the deed in the back room of the Christian County Courthouse. Over the following decades, the family added parcels in 2 separate purchases, 80 acres in 1962 and another 40 in 1979. By the time Raymond inherited it from Coleman in 1971, the place totaled 340 acres of mixed Ozark ground, about 180 in pasture and hay, the rest in mature timber running along the eastern ridge, where the land broke steep and the cedar and hickory grew close together and the deer walked through on trails that hadn't changed in 50 years. Coleman built the main barn in 1949 from rough-sawn white oak. The timber came off the east ridge. The rafters were hand-hewn, and you could still see the broad-axe marks in the wood if you stood in the right light. The tin roof had been patched 3 times, most recently in 2017 when a line of April storms removed most of the west face in one long peel. The barn holds the memory of the place as much as the deed does. Raymond Dale Cutter was born in 1944, the year his own father put up the north fence line along the county road. He grew up working the farm the way Ozark farm children grew up working, early and without much commentary about it. He married June Hartley in 1970 at the Church of the Nazarene in Ozark, where his mother had been a member since the 1950s. They had 2 children, Gerald, born 1974, and Miriam, born 1977. June died of pancreatic cancer in February of 2008, 14 days after diagnosis. Raymond never said much about it after the first month. He went back to working the way farm men of his generation did, not because the grief wasn't real, but because the calves didn't know about the grief, and that was the part of life he understood how to carry. He kept going to the Nazarene church every Sunday and Wednesday, and he never once stopped being a father to the 2 children he had left. Gerald Cutter grew up on the farm and had no particular love of it by the time he was 16. He was smart and restless and good with numbers, and he took a business degree from Missouri State in 1997. He got a job in property management in Springfield and married a woman named Connie in 2001 and built a life 60 miles northwest of the farm. He came back for Christmas most years when the kids were young, less often after. He sent cards at the right times and called every few weeks and was, by most measures, a decent son and a dutiful brother. He was simply steadily gone. Miriam stayed. She stayed through her mother's illness and her mother's death, through the winter of 2009 when cattle prices collapsed and Raymond considered selling off half the herd to cover the operating note from the Bank of Ozark. She stayed when the hay press broke down in July of 2013, and the two of them worked from before dawn to well past dark for 11 straight days, putting up 600 bales by hand rake and equipment that was already 20 years old, because the newer baler cost more than they had, and the hay needed to be in before the next rain window. She was at the FSA office in Ozark every time a commodity program deadline came around. She was on the phone with the vet at 2 in the morning during a difficult calving in January. She kept the books at the kitchen table in the same ledger notebook Raymond had used since 1994, her handwriting underneath his column after column. She did not have her name on the deed. Raymond had always meant to do something about that. He just never did. By April of 2022, the Cutter farm ran about 78 head of registered Black Angus cows with the herd that came off them, roughly 60 to 65 calves born each spring. Raymond had always kept careful records in a ledger on the kitchen counter, noting weights, vet visits, birth dates, and calf losses in a slanted hand that told you exactly what kind of man he was, precise, unsentimental, and deeply aware of the cost of things. He had a minor stroke in September 2021. The doctors at Cox Medical Center in Ozark described it as a right hemisphere ischemic event, mild in severity. He was released after 4 days. He came home, walked out to the barn, checked on the cows, and didn't mention the stroke to either of his children more than twice. He died of a heart attack on April 8, 2022, in the South pasture. He was 78 years old. He was checking fence, the way he had checked that same fence 10,000 times. Miriam found him at 6:40 in the evening, in his canvas jacket, with the wire crimpers still in his left hand. When a person dies in Missouri without a will, without any documented statement of their wishes, the law does not grieve with you. It moves immediately into a framework called intestate succession. Under Missouri statute, when a parent dies without a will and leaves 2 adult children as the sole surviving heirs, the estate is divided equally. 50% to Gerald Cutter, 50% to Miriam Cutter. That applies to everything the deceased owned, including the 340 acres Raymond had worked since before either of his children were born. The farm appraised during the estate process at $1.2 million, mostly on the strength of timber ground values and Ozark Hill country land that had appreciated steadily through the previous decade. That meant each heir's theoretical share stood at approximately $600,000. Miriam had $14,000 in savings. She had a 2009 Ford F-250 with 190,000 miles on it and a left rear window seal that whistled at highway speeds. She had no equity line, no established business credit, and no formal documentation of the 2 decades she had spent working the place. Gerald's letter arrived through the mail in late April, drafted by a Springfield probate attorney named Harlan Briggs. The language was professional and restrained. It stated that Gerald was entitled to his half of the estate under Missouri intestate law, and that he was willing to permit Miriam to buy him out at fair market value, $600,000 for his share, if she could secure financing within 90 days. If she could not, Gerald would proceed with a partition action in the Circuit Court Christian County. Miriam read the letter twice at the kitchen table. She set it next to her father's cattle ledger. Then she got up and went out to feed the calves because that's what the calves needed. A partition action, and this is something most people in rural families don't learn until they're already inside one, is one of the most painful and least discussed legal mechanisms in American farm life. When 2 or more co-owners of a property cannot agree on what to do with it, any one of them can file a civil lawsuit asking a court to order a partition. The court typically orders either a physical division of the land, called partition in kind, or, more commonly when the property is a working farm, a partition by sale. That means a court-ordered public auction, not a family decision, not a negotiated price. A public auction open to any bidder on a date set by the court. The co-owner who files doesn't have to prove wrongdoing. They don't have to establish cruelty or neglect or broken agreement. They simply have to demonstrate that they are a legal co-owner and that the co-owners cannot reach agreement. Every year, in counties across the rural United States, family farms go to the auction block, not because the bank called the loan, but because a co-heir exercised a legal right that most people don't know exists until the letter arrives. Miriam called 4 banks in the first 2 weeks, 2 in Ozark, 1 in Nixa, 1 in Republic. Each of them asked the same questions: collateral, income verification, existing debt structure. She had the land, or half of it, pending probate. She had the cattle revenue, which ran roughly $90,000 gross in a good year off the calf sales, with expenses that consumed most of it. She had no formal salary history, no pay stubs, no W-2 forms. 20 years of work on the family farm, and the paper record said almost nothing. The first bank declined in 6 days, the second in 9. The third asked for 2 weeks and then called to say they couldn't structure a loan against disputed estate property. The fourth, a farm credit lender northeast of Springfield, asked Miriam to come in person. She drove the 45 minutes in the pickup with the bad windows seal, sat across from a loan officer for 2 hours, answered every question she was asked, and was told at the end that her debt-to-income ratio, given the estate dispute and the legal uncertainty of the partition timeline, put the application outside their current parameters for risk. She drove home with the window whistling the whole way. Gerald and Miriam had never had one single fight about the farm. They'd had 20 years of smaller ones. There was the moment at their mother's funeral when Gerald mentioned that the farm would probably need to be sold eventually, and Miriam had looked at him with a silence he understood well enough not to push through. There was a phone call in 2015 when Gerald asked Raymond to consider pulling equity out of part of the acreage for a real estate project he was weighing in Springfield. Raymond had said no, quietly, and without a lengthy explanation. Gerald had called Miriam afterward to ask if she knew anything about it, and she had said, "He said no, Gerald. That's the whole of it." Their conversations after that had been cordial and infrequent. Between them, there had always been a politeness that was really a distance. They were not enemies. They were strangers who shared blood, a childhood, and a piece of ground, and somewhere in the middle of their adult lives, the distance between those things had grown too large to paper over. The thing Miriam had never said to Gerald, and had said only to her friend Phyllis Ramsey, who sang alto in the Nazarene choir and had known the Cutter family for 40 years, was that she believed Gerald might not be entirely wrong about what he was legally entitled to. What kept her awake at night was not the injustice of the statute. It was the feeling that Raymond had known for years, that this moment might come, and had chosen silence over the 30 minutes it would have taken to address it. He had told her once, in the cab of the old John Deere 4020, driving the East Ridge line to check the timber boundary after a windstorm took some trees down in 2018, that he'd been meaning to get his affairs sorted. She had told him then, at the age of 74, that Dale Weston was right there in Ozark, that it would take an afternoon, that it wasn't complicated. Raymond had said he'd do it. He hadn't. She did not know whether to grieve that fact or to understand it for what it probably was. A farm man of his generation who didn't know how to sit across a table and talk about his own death in precise legal terms, deferring a conversation he didn't know how to start. After the partition letter arrived, Miriam drove into Ozark and sat in Dale Weston's office, a 2-room space above the pharmacy on South 2nd Street, with a faded University of Missouri law diploma on the wall and a plastic peace lily in the corner that had been there for at least 15 years. She told him everything. She brought the partition letter, the estate inventory, and the bank declination letters in a manila folder she'd kept on the kitchen table since April. Weston listened without taking many notes. Then he said, "Miriam, the law is clear about what Gerald can do. My job right now is to find out if there's anything he can't do. I don't have an answer to that yet." He told her to go home. Go through every drawer, every box, every file folder in Raymond's desk, any document with Raymond's handwriting on it. Every letter, every note, every scrap. You're looking for anything that might document intent. He said, a statement of his wishes. It may not be there, but you need to go look before we know. She started with the obvious places. The file cabinet in the back bedroom Raymond had used as an office for 30 years, the shoebox of receipts on the pantry shelf, the metal strongbox under his bed that turned out to hold the truck title, a 1982 savings bond for $200 in faded green print, and a photograph of June in a blue dress that Miriam had never seen before. She went through the desk. She went through the kitchen drawers. She found 30 years' worth of co-op receipts and FSA correspondence and one unopened letter from a Branson timeshare company postmarked 2011. She found a birthday card from Gerald dated 2004 and another from herself dated 1993, written in a child's careful script. She did not start with the Bible. She almost didn't touch it at all. It was a black King James, a church gift from 1967, and it had sat on Raymond's nightstand the way it had always sat, closed but used. The spine had been cracked and re-glued at least once. Several pages carried the faint ghost of a pen that had pressed through from above, from years of marginalia written in a younger man's hand. The verse marker was a strip of tan leather stamped with Psalm 37 verse 3 in gold letters that had mostly worn away with handling. She had given it to him in the summer of 2003 for Father's Day, driven to the Christian bookstore in Nixa, and picked it out herself. She remembered writing the verse on the gift receipt in the car before she wrapped it. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and enjoy safe pasture. She opened the Bible to where the marker sat. Between the thin page of Psalm 37 and the first verse of Psalm 38. Pressed flat against the inner margin of the binding was a folded piece of yellow legal paper. She unfolded it slowly, the way you unfold something when you're not certain you want to know what it says. And you're going to read it anyway. Raymond's handwriting, the same slanted hand from the cattle ledger, the same careful letter shapes she had watched form at the kitchen table her entire life, filled most of the page. It was dated November 14th, 2021. 2 months after his stroke, 5 months before he died. The parcel numbers from the county assessor's records were written in the upper left corner from memory in Raymond's hand. She sat on the edge of his bed and read it twice without making a sound. Then she called Dale Weston's office at 8:30 in the evening, knowing he wouldn't get the message until morning, because she couldn't think of anything else to do. She didn't eat that night. She sat at the kitchen table with the folded page and the open Bible and a cup of coffee she forgot to drink, and she prayed the way she'd been praying since April 8th, not a formal prayer. Not one with a shape she'd learned from a hymnal. The kind that was mostly a long, exhausted staying in the presence of something she couldn't fully name. The way her father had once described prayer in the hard years. Not asking for a miracle, just staying present until you can hear what's already there. What Raymond had written on that legal page was not a formal will in the traditional sense. He had not consulted an attorney. There were no witnesses. There was no notarization. There was only a man at a kitchen table for months after a stroke, with a piece of yellow paper and a pen, writing down what he believed needed to be said. But Missouri law, and about half the states in the country, makes room for exactly this. Under Missouri Revised Statute Section 474.320, a handwritten document expressing testamentary intent, entirely in the testator's own handwriting, dated and signed, can be admitted to probate as a valid holographic will. No witnesses required. No attorney required. The requirement is simple. The handwriting must be entirely the testator's. The date must be present. The signature must be present, and the intent must be clear. Raymond's page met every element. It was entirely in his hand. No printed form, no type, not a single line that wasn't his. It was dated November 14th, 2021. It was signed at the bottom right. Raymond Dale Cutter, and its language was clear. He stated that it was his intent and wish that the farmland, the 340 acres in Christian County, Missouri, which he identified by parcel number, pass in full to his daughter Miriam, because she had worked it alongside him for 20 years, and he believed it was right and fair that she should have it. He stated that his savings account and his 1996 Ford pickup should pass to Gerald. He stated that his personal effects should be divided between his children equally. He had probably never heard the term holographic will. He had simply written what he believed needed writing, in the place he trusted most to keep it. Dale Weston held the page under his desk lamp on a Tuesday morning in late May 2022 and read it 4 times before he spoke. Then he said, "Miriam, this may be a valid holographic will." He explained the statute. He explained what the requirements were and how Raymond's document appeared to meet them. He explained that the document would need to be submitted to probate, that Gerald would almost certainly contest it, and that a contested probate cost time and money and could not be guaranteed. But he also said this: "Your father wrote this 2 months after a stroke. Gerald's attorney is going to argue he lacked the mental capacity to make a will at that time. What the medical records from September 2021 actually show is going to be everything." Weston filed the holographic will with the probate division of the Circuit Court of Christian County that week. Harlan Briggs, representing Gerald, filed a formal contest within 3 weeks. Briggs raised 2 arguments. First, that Raymond had lacked testamentary capacity in November 2021 due to the effects of the September stroke. Second, that the handwriting on the document could not be conclusively attributed to Raymond without forensic examination. The contest effectively stayed the partition action while the court determined the ownership question. A partition proceeding could not proceed until probate established who owned what. For the first time since April, Miriam had a pause in the legal clock. Not a victory, just a pause. The court scheduled a full evidentiary hearing for October 2022. Until then, she had a farm to run. The summer of 2022 was not kind to the Ozark Hills. July brought 19 straight days over 97 degrees with almost no measurable rainfall for the entire month. The pastures went dry and powdery by late July. Miriam was hauling water to the south trough from Neil Hargrove's pond. The neighbor to the north who had farmed the adjoining 80 acres since 1989 and who told her without being asked that she could draw from it as long as she needed. She sold 14 head earlier than planned in August, lighter than she wanted, and into a market that had softened from spring, and used the proceeds to cover the quarterly county tax bill and an outstanding vet bill from a spring respiratory outbreak in the calves. After those payments cleared, she had $3,100 in the operating account. She applied for an emergency operating loan through the Farm Service Agency in September, a program Raymond had contributed to through commodity program participation for 30 years. The loan was approved for $28,000. It was enough to carry the cattle operation through winter regardless of what the probate court decided in October. accepting it still cost her something she couldn't fully name. In September of 2022, about a month before the hearing, Miriam did something she had not done in more than a year. She called Gerald. Not his attorney, not through Weston. She called the cell number she'd had since before the lawyers, the number she used to say that Dad was sick or that Christmas dinner was moved to 2 o'clock. He answered on the third ring, his voice careful the way a man's voice is careful when he expects a conversation to become a problem. She did not ask him to drop the contest. She did not apologize because she had nothing to apologize for. What she said was this: Gerald, I found what Dad left. I want you to know it says what it says, and I'm going to let the court decide whether it's valid. But I also want you to know that if it is valid, I'm going to honor every part of it, including your part. I'm not trying to take something from you that he intended you to have. Gerald was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Miriam, I spent $14,000 with Harlan. He tells me the document probably won't hold. She said, okay. He said, I'm not doing this to hurt you. She said, I know that. And then, because she had thought about it for 6 months and believed it to be true, she added, Dad should have handled this when he was alive, Gerald. He should have talked to both of us. He didn't. I don't know what to do with that any more than you do. But I'm not going to fight about what he owed you. I'm going to let the court decide what he left. Gerald said he'd talk to Connie and to Harlan and call her back. He never called back. Weston had, by this point, subpoenaed Raymond's full medical records from Cox Medical Center. The documentation of the September 2021 stroke was thorough and, for Miriam's case, favorable. The attending physician's notes described a right hemisphere ischemic event, mild in severity, with no documented cognitive impairment. Raymond had passed all standard orientation and language assessments during his 4-day admission. Person, place, time, and basic decision-making capacity all documented as intact at discharge. There was no clinical basis for an argument that Raymond had lacked the mental capacity to form testamentary intent in November 2021. The capacity argument was Briggs's stronger claim. The medical records took most of it apart. For the handwriting, Weston retained a forensic document examiner from St. Louis, a retired FBI laboratory analyst named Denise Carmack, who had spent 22 years in question document examination. Carmack compared the handwriting on the yellow legal page against Raymond's known samples: the cattle ledger, dated co-op receipts, FSA correspondence, and personal letters on file with the estate. Her report, delivered in September 2022, concluded that the handwriting on the November 14, 2021 document was consistent in all significant examined characteristics with Raymond Dale Cutter's authenticated samples. No basis for question was identified. Miriam paid Carmack's fee, $3,400, with the last of her personal savings before the FSA operating loan cleared. Her checking account, the morning the check went out, had $218.44 in it. The hearing in the Circuit Court of Christian County was held on a Thursday morning in late October 2022. The courtroom was small and plain and smelled like old wood and institutional carpet. The kind of room where American rural families have stood before the law for 150 years, some of them walking out with the land and some of them walking out without. Miriam wore the same gray blazer she'd worn to her mother's funeral in 2008, the one she kept in the back of the closet for occasions when appearance had to hold steady even if the rest of her couldn't. Weston sat beside her. Briggs sat across the aisle with Gerald. Gerald did not look at Miriam when he entered the room. The hearing ran 3 hours. Briggs presented the capacity argument first, a careful, technical reading of the post-stroke timeline, placing significant weight on the 47 days between Raymond's discharge and the date on the document. He argued that the informal nature of the writing, the absence of any legal consultation, and the fact that Raymond had reportedly mentioned his estate to Miriam in 2018 but not returned to it for 4 years, suggested that the November 2021 document was the product of impaired judgment and emotional fragility rather than clear testamentary intent. Weston's response was methodical and concise. He submitted the full Cox Medical Center discharge report and the attending physician's notes in full. He entered Carmack's question document report into the record. He presented the narrow, specific statutory requirements of the Missouri Holographic Will Statute and walked through how Raymond's page satisfied each one, line by line. Then he made the argument that mattered most. Holographic will provisions exist in Missouri law precisely for the Raymond Cutters of the world, for the man who knows what he wants, who can express it clearly in his own words and his own hand, but who doesn't have the money or the habit of sitting across a desk from an attorney to formalize it. The statute doesn't require a man to be sophisticated. It requires him to be clear. Raymond Cutter was clear. Weston read the document aloud in the courtroom. Raymond's words, in Raymond's phrasing, without legal language, without complexity. A father explaining what he believed was right. A farmer who knew what the land had cost and who had paid it. The court took the matter under advisement. 11 days later, the ruling came by mail. The holographic will was valid. The document was accepted by the court as Raymond Dale Cutter's last will and testament. The terms of the will would govern the distribution of the estate. Briggs filed a motion for reconsideration within the week. It was denied. Gerald had the option of taking the case to the Missouri Court of Appeals. Weston told Miriam to prepare for that possibility and not to assume the decision was final. Gerald consulted with Briggs for 2 weeks. In mid-November, he notified the court through counsel that he would not appeal. Miriam does not know exactly what settled it. She believes part of it was cost. Gerald had spent close to $22,000 by that point between the partition preparation and the will contest, and the appellate process would have added thousands more with no certain outcome. She believes part of it was Carmack's report, which left almost no evidentiary ground for the handwriting argument. She believes, quietly, that it might have been something else, that hearing his father's words read aloud in a bare October courtroom, the specific, plain language of a man who had loved 2 children and tried to be fair to both of them, and who had written down his exact reasoning with a pencil at a kitchen table, may have done something to Gerald that no ruling could undo. What Raymond had left Gerald was the savings account, $4,300 at the time of death, and the 1996 Ford pickup, which Miriam had listed and sold in October for $2,100 at a farm auction in Nixa. She wrote Gerald a certified check for $6,400 and mailed it to his address in Springfield. Her account after that held $218.44. The farm was hers. She drove home from Ozark on a Wednesday in November after stopping at Weston's office to sign the final probate closing documents. The sky was the pale, dry gray that settles over the Missouri Ozarks in late fall, the color of a sheet of paper held up to a covered window. She took Highway 65 south, then the county road east, and crossed the bridge over Finley Creek the way she had crossed it 10,000 times in her life. She pulled into the farm lane and sat in the truck for a few minutes before she got out. The particular kind of victory that doesn't feel like winning is hard to describe. Miriam Cutter had kept her father's farm. She had done what Raymond had intended. She had fought for a document that no one else even knew existed, in a courtroom her father had never entered, before a judge he had never met, and the law had agreed with his intent. The partition action was gone. Her name was going on the deed. The 340 acres of Ozark ground that Coleman Cutter paid $3,400 for in 1938 would remain, for at least one more generation, in the family that had worked it. Gerald has not called since. She does not expect he will. She tells herself she is at peace with that because she is trying to be. She is a Christian woman who believes in reconciliation, and she is aware that what has broken between her and her brother exceeds the reach of any legal system to repair. She has prayed for Gerald, not for the phone call, not for the outcome she wants, but for whatever he is carrying. Those prayers take the form her father taught her, not by instruction, but by example, not loud, not formal, mostly honest conversation directed upward from the kitchen table, and then getting up and going back to work. She doesn't know yet if anything will come of it. What she knows is the farm. She rotated her hay ground in the spring of 2023 and brought in a stronger than average first cutting. She weaned 58 calves and sold at $184 per hundredweight in October, the best she'd seen in 4 years. She replaced the water line on the south trough that had been patching all winter. She fixed the stall gate on the main barn, the one that had been sticking since 2019 and that Raymond always said he'd get to. She got to it in April, on a Sunday afternoon when the light was right and the day was quiet, with the old toolbox from the barn and nobody helping her. The 4020 needed a hydraulic pump in April 2023. The bill was $1,100. She paid it without drama and kept working. She keeps her father's Bible on her own nightstand now. The leather verse marker moves each week wherever she reads, but she takes it back to Psalm 37 sometimes. Back to the place where the page was. She runs her thumb along the spine of the binding, the cracked leather, the place where the paper had rested for 4 months between her father's death and the day she opened it. She has never quite settled the question of what Raymond meant by putting it there, whether the forgetting of a will was something he intended to fix and ran out of time for. Whether somewhere in his quiet Ozark mind he trusted that what needed to be found would eventually be found. Whether he was a man who trusted God with the details the way people of his generation sometimes did, not passively, not negligently, but with a specific kind of faith that is harder to explain than it is to recognize when you see it. She does not know. It is possible he didn't either. What she knows is that he folded the page and put it there because he trusted something to hold it, and it held. If your family has land, or had land, and someone in it never made a will, or made promises that were never put in writing, or worked a place for years without their name on a single deed, I want to hear from you. Not because there's a lesson that covers every situation. There isn't one. But because this is one of the most common quiet disasters in rural America, and most of the people going through it have never heard anyone describe what it actually looks and feels like. The letter, the phone calls to the bank, the silence on the other end of a line you've been reaching across your whole life. If you've been Miriam, or if you've been Gerald watching from a distance. Or if your family found something in a drawer, or an old Bible, or a strongbox that changed everything, say something below. This is what this channel is for.